If we are to understand ancient Israel, we have to look at the larger context in which ancient Israel grew up and in which its texts were developed. Ancient Israel is one kingdom and people among many different people groups and kingdoms. It was surrounded by great empires in Mesopotamia and in Egypt and by other powers that were neighboring on its border. And in many ways, the Hebrew Bible itself encourages us to look outside of the Hebrew Bible, because we hear about people like the Edomites, we hear about the Egyptians, we hear about the Mesopotamians and the Assyrians, and so as we read the text, we have to think, oh, who are these people surrounding ancient Israel? And in order to understand them, we have to look into archaeology, we have to look into the art history of these people and see the similar, and compare them to the biblical text and look for similarities and differences. We have to, in some ways, silhouette the biblical text against that broader background if we are to understand it properly. One interesting example of how the ancient Near Eastern evidence can help us understand the Bible is in the story of how Moses is born and then makes his way into Pharaoh's household. So the story is this, that Pharaoh is going to kill off all of the Hebrew boys. And so when Moses is born, his family attempts to save them, and so they put him into a little basket, into a little ark, is in fact what it says in Hebrew, and he is floated down the Nile and picked up by Pharaoh's daughter. Now, this is a story, again, that's quite familiar to us, but what the ancient Near Eastern evidence shows is that Sargon the Great, who is a Mesopotamian king, a very similar story was told about him, in which he was also sent down a river, but in this case rescued by a goddess. And so this is an example of what the Hebrew Bible so often does, which is to adopt stories from the larger culture and to adapt them in ways that are relevant to their own culture and oftentimes to their own theology. In many ways, ancient Israel is similar to the surrounding cultures, similar to the Babylonians, similar to the Edomites, etc., the people surrounding them. But there are, in fact, instances where Israel is unique. And I think, as with any culture, no two cultures are alike. Every culture has its own distinctiveness, and so we need to recognize that this also exists in ancient Israel. So let me give you an example that comes from the legal text, from laws that are in the book of Exodus. In chapters 20 through 23, a section that's often referred to as the Covenant Code, we find a set of laws, some of which are very similar to laws that we find in the Code of Hammurabi, sometimes called the Code of Hammurabi. It's a list of laws from an 18th century Mesopotamian king. So it's very likely that Israel's scribes, in fact, were aware of this text or had some familiarity with it, and that those laws were somehow worked into their law code. So that's a point of similarity. Within the Mesopotamian laws and laws from elsewhere, laws are typically created by the king, who is the keeper of justice. As an example, again, returning to the Code of Hammurabi, on the stela itself on which these laws are collected, Hammurabi is seen receiving the rod and the ring which represent his authority from Shamash, from the solar god. But it is in fact Hammurabi himself who gives the laws to the people as a just king. Within the Bible, though, it is God who gives the laws to the people. And so this is just one interesting but small way in which Israel communicates its laws uniquely.